Man, that kind of sounds like the Mr. Perfect theme in a Western style. Man, AEW could really find... I don't know who does their music, but they could really find better music from no copyright music on YouTube. This is Horses to Water. I was looking for something with a little bit more action to it, but that's okay, that'll do. This week we're talking about AEW. I know we've bounced around a little bit from modern day to the past, redoing old angles to, weight classes and... hang on a second. Sorry, I forgot I had my fan going. I just did a horror reanimated episode about Friday the 13th Part 2 and a fan theory that I found on the Friday the 13th franchise group page on Facebook, and my office gets really, really warm. There's one, I think there's one, maybe two vents for our AC unit, for our HVAC, our heating and cooling in the house. And it gets super, super hot in here, which it's good that there's only two vents and that one is hidden because I don't get a lot of noise, but it gets really, really hot in here when I record. I mean, a couple of months ago, I had my brother and his bandmate Dan from Erie Point over, and we were talking about Star Wars. And I swear to God, we were here for 3-4 hours. And by the time we left, we were all soaking wet. And that's enough of that. Again, I'm Brian J. Welcome to Wrestling Reanimated. This week, we're talking about AEW, specifically the TNT title. But before we get started, you can follow me on Facebook. You can follow us, Wrestling Reanimated. Go give us a like and follow, so that way you get not only do you get to get in on the discussion, but you also get the show links and all sorts of other stuff that I share from other sites. But you can be a part of the show in some ways. I mean, when you send me ideas, theories, old angles, it makes my job easier because all I have to do is think about them. I don't have to dream them up. So you can follow us there on Facebook, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at bshowbrian. Pretty simple. And you can email me, bshowbrian@gmail.com, if you have any thoughts on the episodes that we do, or any ideas for other angles or things you want to pitch and you want to hear me talk about, or occasionally I'll have some friends on. I want to start doing that soon. I have a couple of guests on throughout the summer. But especially before COVID ends, because I know once COVID's over with and everyone goes back to normal, probably going to be harder to get people to guest on these podcasts than it is right now. So let's see if we can make that happen. This week, I mentioned AEW. I mentioned the TNT title. So we all know, and I'm not going to go in depth and talk about how bad the TNT title is. When people zig, I want to zag, right? I don't want to just be another wrestling sports show guy. I don't want to just be someone who covers the latest news. I want to take, as the title suggests, wrestling and reanimate it. I want to take ideas and rework them. I want to take classic angles that never happened and discuss them or talk about them and give the scenarios that could have happened and kind of bring them to life. That's what the show's about. A mix of fan fiction and what if. So, at Double or Nothing, the TNT title was unveiled, and they were all proud of it until everyone shit on it. And then, oh no, it's not finished. Okay. Kudos to the belt maker, who weathered that storm pretty well. Got his first taste of toxic wrestling fandom. Shout out to JD from New York. And hopefully his family's okay, if you're following that situation. But a couple weeks ago, I wanted to do an episode on the rumored secondary title that AEW was going to come out with. We'd heard some rumors it was maybe a six-man tag title, which they could still have done, although I think that it's probably better suited for a tournament, a trios tournament, which I really loved when Ring of Honor did that, and I know Chikara did trios tournaments. Tag Wars, that was Ring of Honor, and maybe I'll maybe I'll throw that in here for another episode down the road, Tag Wars. Because Tag Wars had stipulations, and it was basically, a trios tournament, and whoever won, each person would get a request. So maybe the tag team that won, they would get a shot at the tag team championships, if they so desired. Or they would petition Ring of Honor management to bring someone in for them to face. A grudge match type thing. So there was a lot of different things. Secondary to just titles or trophies or King of the Ring, or there was more to it, right? There was more stakes. And I think that is what is missing from a lot of mid-card stuff in wrestling, is stakes. Because let's face it, WWE, the mid-card titles don't really mean a whole lot. And congratulations to Apollo Crews. They're finally doing something with him that gave him the U.S. title. Hopefully he can do something with it. Hopefully they don't just kind of let him fizzle out with it. But for a long time, the Intercontinental title used to mean something. A lot of fans took it as the workhorse title. It was held by, Mr. Perfect, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Macho Man Randy Savage, Shawn Michaels, the workhorses of the company, Bret Hart, who often had great matches, Tito Santana, who often had great matches, while the guys on top were the bigger, lumbering, heavyweight box office draw. You get the marquee out of a Hogan Andre, you're going to get a great match out of Steamboat Savage. You're going to get the casuals with Hogan Andre and the story. You're going to draw in hardcore wrestling fans with Savage Steamboat, and that's what happened. And that was really, it was that, but it was also the championship where the next up-and-coming guy would kind of prove himself. And I think the last guy to really do that was Randy Orton. And he really did have to prove himself. He faced Mick Foley for the title at Backlash in a turning point in Orton's career, when people finally got behind the guy. But I want to say he was the last one to really do that. When he beat RVD for the title in December of the year before at Armageddon, and he held it for a while. He's really the last guy who was like, oh, here's an up-and-coming guy. He's going to hold the IC title. It's going to solidify him. He's going to test his mettle, and then he's going to move on to the WWE title. I think he was the last Intercontinental champion that felt like he had that prestige. And Jericho had it off and on, and Christian had it for a while. Christian and Booker had the title. But maybe those guys, maybe Christian, Booker, and RVD, or Randy Orton were the last to really do that and have that special feel to them. In the NWA, the U.S. champion, if Dusty Rhodes wasn't the world champion because Ric Flair held it, then maybe Dusty held the U.S. title, and he was defending against Tully or against Nikita or Ivan Koloff, or the other way around. Maybe one of those guys had it, and Dusty was challenging for that title now. So the mid-card titles, as they've been deemed, have always been important in previous years. Hell, even ECW, man, the TV champion, Rob Van Dam. He was undefeated, or held the title, I should say, for 2 years. And his matches as the TV champion were just as much of a draw, if not more so, than Shane Douglas as the world champion. Or Taz as the world champion. I would say probably more so than Taz as the world champion at that time, if my timing lines up correctly. So look throughout history, and you'll see that mid-card titles or secondary titles, I hate calling them mid-card titles, because yeah, they main evented B shows, and yes, they were a lot of times in the middle of the card. They were a lot of times very important, especially, like I said, the NWA. Or the WCW. During the Monday Night Wars, you had the TV title, which was contested between guys like Fit Finlay, William Regal, Dean Malenko, Arn Anderson at some points. Bobby Eaton, I think, his only singles title in WCW. And I think it was him and Arn Anderson. Slamboree. God, just Google search and then watch it on the network. Bobby Eaton versus Arn Anderson TV title. I'm I watched it a couple weeks ago, or a couple nights ago. It's a really, really good match. But there were all sorts of important matchups, whether it was the TV title, the U.S. title, the Cruiserweight title at some point. And what the wrestling companies or territories used to do was when they would use certain titles, and they would only use them once a year, but they would use them as an excuse to make the card seem more important. Oh, well, you have the U.S. Tag Team Champions and the World Tag Team Champions. Oh, well, we have this title and that title, and it may be only defended once or twice a year, but they would bring in these secondary titles. I think there was it the Fullers? Or there was another territory somewhere, I think in the Midwest, where they literally had like a drawer of championship belts. And if they wanted to promote a big card, they would bring someone in and just give them these belts and say they won it somewhere. And there was this prestigious tag team tournament. The Mid-States tag champions are going to face the Interstates tag champ, whatever. But yeah, it's carny and hokey. But at the same time, there's a lot of history there. And just like you can champion a style. So the X Division was, there are no limits. It's not about weight limits. The X Division in TNA was really championing the new wave of wrestling, the new style of matches, which pretty much dominates AEW, Impact Wrestling, WWE, whatever company it is. That style was pushed forth first by Ring of Honor, then by TNA that kind of took it for their X Division title. It was a mix of, it was the American Strong style is what it was. It was just a mix of work rate American wrestling with the Japanese junior heavyweight style, a little bit of lucha and some Canadian and European wrestling, like mat wrestling. That's what it was. It was an amalgamation of these different styles that had been seen on the lower part of the cards, but brought up another level. And this was the new wave of wrestling. And that's what you get now in the main events of WWE. And WWE is even, it's X Division light in a sense, but watch those matches. There's a lot of stuff. There's not as many risks, but the style, the overall style, has become the style of the industry. So I think you can do a lot with using a certain title to bring about a certain style or to champion a certain style. And I think if you have the right person in mind to hold that title, it can be a perfect vehicle for that person. And I know they gave it to Cody. And I think a lot of people saw that coming. Cody lost the match with MJF. He can't challenge for the AEW World title. So a lot of people thought, okay, so yeah, that's right. Now he's going to be the TNT champion. And that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I'm not judging their storytelling right now. This is not a judgment. I mean, obviously, I can sit here and we can nitpick things and pick it apart. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying this is a thought I had when I first thought of this podcast, this Wrestling Reanimated, is I started thinking about the wrestlers in AEW, who people saw as the superstars, who the draws were, where the money was. And no matter what you want to say about the Bucks and their style, no matter what anyone wants to say about Kenny Omega, no matter what anyone wants to say about Cody or Hangman Page, those five guys, that's what All Elite Wrestling was built on. It wasn't Colt Cabana, Chris Daniels. It wasn't, trying to think. It wasn't Phoenix and Pentagon. I love those guys, but it wasn't. All Elite Wrestling, it's in the name. It's elite, the elite. It was those five guys. That was the draw. Those were the stars. So I know they didn't necessarily, especially the Bucks and Omega, they didn't want to lead with that foot forward because they didn't want to be seen as glory hogs. But that's where the money was. That's what people were tuning in to see. And also the style that they all kind of embody in a way. Less so Cody and Hangman, but more so Omega and the Bucks. That's the style that people wanted to see. So although people nitpick them and say it's not going to attract a national casual audience, which is fine, they're also playing to their base. And that's what brought them to the dance. So when I look at those guys, the Young Bucks kind of fell off, but they came back and they've been having matches with people. So the Bucks, even though they don't hold the titles, they're at the forefront. They were in the main angle with Omega and with Hangman Page. Cody's doing fine for himself. And of course you have Jericho and Ambrose, or Moxley. Those guys are big stars too, so of course they're featured. Moxley's the champion. Jericho was the champion. And you had to bring those guys in. You had to give them certain concessions. However, you also need to build for the future. And although it's good to have a championship on Cody because he is in some ways the heart and soul of the movement now, of AEW. He's the public face of AEW. I think there's a really interesting story to tell between Omega, Page, and to a lesser extent, Cody. Not to a lesser extent, I shouldn't say that. What I would have done with the TNT title or whatever it was, and I was talking to Mr. Positive about this, my old co-host, who just lost his grandmother. So if you know Ben and you remember him from the days of the B Show podcast, and you follow him on social media, give him a shout because he just lost his grandmother and he took care of her for a while. I know that it meant a lot to him. Very tough on him when she passed. So I just want to shout him out. And if you know him, send him a note. But I was talking to him about this, and to me, that title would have been a perfect vehicle. I'm just going to get right into it for an up-and-coming wrestler who isn't battle-tested on the national stage, who hasn't been in a WWE or in any other national company in that position of prominence. Because if you look, Cody has been in some high-profile matches in WWE, and he had some feuds in Japan. Kenny Omega was in main events at the Tokyo Dome in Japan. They've been on some big stages. The one who hasn't, who a lot of people have pegged to be one of the future stars of AEW, and I would agree, especially after what I've seen from him over the past 6 months and his character work, is Hangman Page. And I think the TNT title, or a secondary title, whatever you would want to call it, would have been a perfect vehicle for him. I think as a proving ground, you could put the title on him, almost like they did with RVD and ECW, not to compare this, because I want this to be completely different. But the way they put it on Van Dam, and Van Dam became the main event. And I think wrestling has been so starved for stars, for superstars, over the past 15 years. I see a lot of fans, my fellow fans on Facebook and on Twitter, they talk about, well, this guy wasn't the main event because he wasn't put on last. Well, in a lot of cases, if you are a star, you are the main event whether you go on last or not. Because you're the star. Star power cannot be denied. Go back, and I know a lot of younger fans don't get into the Attitude Era as much as people like me did, because it was a time capsule, man. It was a moment in time. It was a movement. So I get that. But go back and watch. Oh, man. I'm trying to think. Go back and watch, not in your house, but when they transitioned in 97 and 98 from in your houses to just the secondary pay-per-views, go watch Breakdown from 97 or 98. Watch the Nation of Domination versus D-Generation X. Those guys, like that, both acts were really over. The fans were behind them. And then watch when Austin comes out later and see how, even though those guys were all over in the mid-card, more so than a lot of people even today who are main eventers, just because wrestling was so hot. Like, as over as those mid-card guys were with the crowd, and as hot as the crowds were for those matches, they were explosive when a guy like The Rock would come out, or a guy like Austin would come out. Someone, like, especially Austin at that time. So, if you're truly a star, it's not always placement and position. Rob Van Dam was the TV champion, and because of his work rate, his style being different, the moves he did, he ended up being the main event of the show, even if he wasn't on last, because no one could follow him. He was good, and people were coming to watch RVD. So, in this case, this would be a great proving ground for Page. Put the title on him, see what he can do. If people get behind him, then either move him up to the world title or do the classic champion versus champion angle. You know, I'm not going to give anything away, but no matter who it is the world title, they could take shots at Hangman, and Hangman's like, hey, you can call yourself the AEW world champion all you want, but we know who the real main event is. And then do a feud that way. I mean, obviously that's an option down the road. Or you do the switch and he becomes champion. But that's my point, is either he will grow into that role or he won't, and you can still, if you flavor that title in a certain way, he doesn't have to be the main event, and he can be the head of that division, if that's what you want to call it. Although I'd hesitate to call it a certain division, because the way I'm thinking of this title, I mean, that might limit it a little bit. But I would have used the TNT title as, and I couldn't come up with a name, and I'm glad they called it TNT or Dynamite. I mean, I would have even liked Dynamite title over TNT. But to be fair, anytime you're kind of placating the network that's a business partner, it's probably not a bad move. But, you know, Dynamite title, TNT title. I was trying to think of a way to encapsulate Hard Knocks without calling it the Hard Knocks title, because it's really cheesy. Or even like Cowboy title, because I mentioned, you know, Adam Page. That's my thought process, is this would fit him particularly well. But to me, AEW, with their tag division, with their world title division, everything they do has that new era flavor to it, although they try to reach back to WCW in some ways without calling it WCW. The TNT title, to me, especially the way that the NWA or WCW used to utilize the U.S. Championship, could have been even more so a more solid throwback to that tradition. In the way of throwing this back to the old school, making the Hard Knocks title, like when you see Adam Page, to me, his style, even though he has acrobatics and he does the flips with the lariat, moonsaults and shooting star presses off the apron, he does that stuff that other people do in those other matches or divisions or whatever you want to call them. But he, in some way, has a little bit more rough around the edges style. He's a bit more of a brawler. He's a more physical wrestler. He's a bit bigger than some of the other guys. So, to me, using him as a throwback to the old Southern style of matches, to me, you could easily do that with the secondary or TNT title, whatever you want to call it. So, again, that cowboy, Southern wrestling, Texas wrestling, Mid-South wrestling, more so Texas, of Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch and the Funks and Manny Fernandez even. Go back and watch some of the earlier Starcades. Manny Fernandez had some matches, some bloody matches with Abdullah the Butcher and Black Bart that would fit right into this. And I know Mike Tyson, they brought him out to present Cody with the title. But this is also a way to bring other people back into the fold, like Terry Funk, like Manny Fernandez, like these other guys of these other eras that don't get screen time in WWE because they never were there or never did anything of note to Vince McMahon for him to think about them to bring them back. Again, linking that with that old Southern style, with that aspect of the NWA that traditional wrestling fans appreciated and the WWF never really adopted. And I'm not saying you have to have blood and guts matches with every match. I'm just saying, with the attitude, that Omega has, down and dirty, let's do it, I'll do anything. Any type of match, we'll do it. But to me, it would be a secondary title that it's not just a mid-card title, as a lot of people would call it. It's not just a mid-card title. This title can main event pay-per-views. Or main event, network specials on TNT. So let's say TNT runs a special, almost like a Saturday Night's Main Event or a Clash of the Champions type special. And it's got a certain feel to it. It's more rough. It's more grudge matches. Maybe Adam Page is the main event versus somebody. And maybe it's in a match that hasn't been seen in a long time. And I'll go through, in a minute, to just talk about some of the matches that you could do. But again, it's something fresh, something that hasn't been done in a long time. And in a way that, you in the WWF, you had the hardcore title. So all of those matches were hardcore rules that had a completely different feel and flavor. And you could take guys who didn't have direction in the regular division. So they didn't wrestle a traditional style. They didn't have the body that The Rock or Triple H had. You could take them like an Al Snow, like a Bob Holly, like even at the time the Big Boss Man really didn't quite fit. He was more of a brawling bruiser. He was a drive-by guy. He was Vince McMahon's personal security for the corporation. That was his gimmick, right? So you could take certain guys and weave them in and out of the hardcore division if their character had that hard-nosed edge to them. So in that same feel, it would be a perfect foil for Darby Allin. So maybe Darby's a small guy. Maybe he's striking out on the world title scene, but he sees, Adam Page. He's a crazy son of a bitch. He'll take any challenge. And maybe Darby's rankings are good, but they're not quite where he needs to be to challenge Moxley. I keep wanting to call him Ambrose. So maybe he's on a roll, but he's not quite there. And something happens where he challenges Adam Page. Or maybe Adam Page recognizes that Darby Allin's a crazy son of a bitch. And he realizes that that's a good opportunity for Darby. He's going to give him a chance. You're a crazy son of a bitch. I respect you. You'll fight anybody. How about fighting me? And they could have a match. And it would be perfect for Darby's style. Because whether they relax the rules or you do gimmick matches or whatever the case, I think that would be a perfect natural fit. Darby Allin reminds me a lot of Mick Foley. And not to box him in that role, but he is that dude who will seemingly do anything to get over and to show his durability and his toughness. And he's not your average wrestler, but he's willing to do a lot of crazy stuff to take him to risk his own physical safety to win the match. And so in that sense, he reminds me of Mick Foley. So that would be perfectly suited for a guy like Darby Allin. Or Ambrose. Let's say Ambrose. I'm going to do this for the next 20 minutes. Let's say Moxley somehow loses the AEW title and goes rogue, and maybe AEW is like, you're too reckless, your matches are costing us money, because who was it? Chris Cruz or someone turned AEW into the Maryland Athletic Commission? Come on. Play that up. Use that in the storyline. Maybe, because heading into the match, Moxley was saying, hey, they don't want me as champion. This company doesn't want me as champion. They want me to back off. They don't want me to be Jon Moxley. But I didn't come here for that. That all disappeared when he became champion. So maybe he loses the title and he gets blocked from challenging for the world title because the company sees the AEW champion as a representative. And even if Chris Jericho's crazy, at least they think he has a certain je ne sais quoi, for lack of a better word. He has a certain panache to him because of the crossover potential, the old WWE and WCW fame. they'd rather put up with his antics with him as a representative of AEW than a crazy guy like Moxley that they can't control. So then maybe that's a good fit for Moxley. If Moxley's not the guy, and he's not the guy to build AEW around, then maybe he would be perfect as the TNT champion. And if the TNT championship gets over with that sort of hard knocks feel to it, then maybe he by default becomes the world champion. Do you get what I'm saying? Not that it's the world title, but that Rob Van Dam mentality. Rob Van Dam was the television champion, but he really was the face of the company for a while, or at least the most popular wrestler. So again, it would be kind of a backdoor way to get some of these guys in. Trying to think, Dustin Rhodes. It could be a way for him to, strip off the paint, go back to the natural, be a throwback, take up the banner for the guys before him like Dusty and Murdoch, and again, I mentioned the Funks and Manny Fernandez. Maybe someone wins the title who's a bit of a prima donna. And they shit on that style, and they shit on the history of Southern wrestling. And then you got Dustin Rhodes shows up in some Dusty Rhodes cowboy boots, and he wants to kick some ass. To me, sorry, my brain is bleeding into other angles that I had an idea for before with Andre the Giant. But that's another time. That's another story for another time. Jimmy Havoc, as much as I don't like the guy, he would be perfect for that sort of no-frills, hard knocks division. Jack Evans, in a way, too, because I'm a huge fan of Jack Evans. Have been for a long time. He could do things that nobody else could do. So, in that sense, it could be a place for guys who are, even for AEW, a bit outside the box. And going back to Dustin, or even Jake Hagar, or Joey Janela. Joey Janela is a crazy dude. He'll do anything to himself or to others. Can you imagine Janela in a scaffold match? Like, there's so many matches that they don't do anymore. And again, I'm not saying every match or every main event match has to be that type of match, but to me, again, it's a way to bring some of those matches back into the fold. And now these companies have access to stunt people, and they have the money to do scaffold matches where, let's say you have at the main event someone erecting a scaffold. Well, now you can set the ring up where they remove the boards from the ring and they turn the ring into essentially a giant crash pad. So someone gets sent off in the main event, off the scaffold into the ring. Almost like when Foley went through, and again I mentioned Foley, Hell in a Cell, Foley versus Triple H, No Way Out 2000. Foley's backdropped through the cell, and while they were fighting outside of the ring and on top of the cell, they had a ring crew underneath, or even before the match, I want to say, but they removed some of the boards where Foley was going to fall. So it was a relatively safe bump that he took. It was a simple backdrop. He went through the cage where it was supposed to break, and he hit the mat where it still was, a drop from 15 feet in the air. But because they essentially turned the ring into a giant landing crash pad, it was a relatively safe bump to take. So you could do the same thing nowadays with a scaffold match. I don't know why no one has tried that. Instead of a ladder match or the Ultimate X, or was it Elevation X in TNA? Why no one's tried Ultimate X or that type of match, again, I have no idea. But yeah, you got Janela, Moxley. Again, that could even be a thing for Luchasaurus. It could be a way for certain guys, again, who may seem a little out of the box to make the face of the company, could really go there and test their mettle before moving on to the world title. Luther, Dr. Luther, he's in AEW. He would be a perfect guy to have a I hate to say a Type A death match, but could you imagine like the character Adam Page drinking beers, someone breaks a beer bottle over his head. Maybe Luther comes out and you've got fake glass. Maybe you dip your fist in the glue and glue the fake glass to his fist, or he comes out and he's got it in his hand already taped up or something. And he just beats the shit out of Adam Page. And then that leads to a match. You could do even matches, cowboy matches, where, and this would really make sense. And again, I'm kind of drifting off here because I'm trying to illustrate the point that you could really do anything as long as it fit that kind of cowboy, no frills, get on your horse and ride, spurs up. You could do matches where spurs are legal. Dudes wear spurs. That could be a little nuts. Maybe, and especially with this COVID stuff, with the social distancing and things, like WWE has really, and AEW now with the Stadium Stampede, but wrestling is starting to evolve to where they're going outside the box a little bit more. They're kind of forced to. You could have Hangman Page waiting at a bar. He throws down a challenge. This ain't sanctioned by AEW, but I really don't care. I'm sick of you running your mouth. The company's not going to let us fight, even under, my circumstances that I usually fight under. But you want a shot at me? I'll meet you at this bar or whatever. I'll talk to the owners. I'll make sure everyone's cleared out. They're in the parking lot. You come find me. I'll have the camera crew there. I'll pay them out of my own pocket and do stuff like that, like out of the box. AEW doesn't sanction it. Title's not on the line. It's not a match. Well, guess what? I'll pay for this out of my own pocket and do the old school thing where like when the NWO's commercials would come on. How are the NWO having commercials on WCW TV? Well, they found out that Eric Bischoff and $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase were buying the airtime. That's how it happened. And in this sense, you could have, Adam Page paying the TV crew to, hey, I'll pay a couple camera guys and some sound guys to come out and film this, and I'll buy time on the show. So I'll give back a portion of my contract to cover the cost of whatever it is. You're off the hook. And again, just make it work. But let's say Luther's a little bit darker. Let's go with somebody else. Let's say you could say Havoc. Dustin Rhodes. Maybe Dustin Rhodes says some stuff that doesn't like Page. So you got the old gunslinger and the new one. Dustin meets him at the bar. They sit down. They have a couple drinks. And then all of a sudden, they just go at it. They're breaking beer bottles over each other's heads. They're throwing crates, serving trays, plates. I mean, do that stuff off-site. But the wild, out-of-control, crazy, reckless, old-school Southern flavor would be something to give to a guy like Page that kind of fits his mold, but also to differentiate him from everybody else. Everybody else is doing the style. They're doing the flips. They're doing the spots. Well, here's a guy like Page who can do all that stuff, but when it comes down to it, he's just a tough motherfucker. Maybe that's the high noon type of match or whatever. I know that's kind of silly. Or bull rope matches or dog collar matches. When's the last time you saw a dog collar match? Take a big, thick-necked dude like Brian Cage. Put a dog collar around him. Whew. That'd be like putting a Cocker Spaniel in there with a pit bull and chain them together. Again, Jake Hager, they've already had some back and forth. Maybe they construct almost like the, what was it called? The Lion's Den? Page says, I'll meet you anywhere. No rules. Lock us in a cage. Go to an MMA gym and put those two in a training cage. And, maybe you even up the score where Hangman brings, Hager doesn't know it, but Hangman brings in some brass knuckles or something. And then there you go. he gets the advantage because, hey, anything goes. Anything goes. Brings in brass knuckles, knocks out Hager in his own element, the MMA style, right? Knocks him out, but with brass knucks. And then that would lead to maybe a blow-off match, a brass knuckles match, which I haven't seen in wrestling in a long time. I don't think I've ever seen a brass knuckles match in the modern era. But again, that's a Manny Fernandez, Black Bart type of match. So now you got Hager, who's an MMA guy and a wrestler. Brass knuckles are legal. And now, maybe at the beginning of the match, they each do a shot, put the brass knuckles on, and then go at it. Or a loaded glove, or a barbed wire match. And again, that's where you bring in a guy like Moxley, Darby, Jimmy Havoc. Let's see. Luther, perfect for that. I'm trying to see some other guys on here. And again, Ortiz. Again, you can take guys that are in tag teams and take a guy like Pentagon, or take a guy like Phoenix or Ortiz or Santana. Is it Santana or Sonata? Santana, yeah. Santana, to me, looks like just a tough, scrappy dude. Or it would be a proving ground. Not a proving ground, I'm sorry. Take a guy like Sammy Guevara, who has a ton of heat, who's a good-looking guy. The Randy Orton factor, right? Take him. And maybe he's got all this heat, and then finally, due to rankings or whatever, now he's forced to fight Adam Page. And now he doesn't want to. Like, he's trying to get out of these matches. And, he's trying to quit. Well, you can't give up. This is a loaded glove match. Or maybe that's how it comes about. Maybe Sammy Guevara, and he's wearing the leather jackets. Maybe he's wearing leather gloves. And maybe something happens where he decks Adam Page, loaded glove. Okay, now, same thing as the brass knuckles. That's legal. You've each got a glove, it's loaded, or something on a pole. I know the pole stuff gets a bad rep from the Russo days of WCW. But some of those matches actually work. Shawn Spears is another guy where he's kind of drifting. He's not doing a lot right now. Here's a guy who could go there, almost like what they did with Bob Holly and Al Snow in the hardcore division back in the Attitude Era days. Here's a guy, he's a good-looking dude, doesn't really fit in, trying to find his place. So then maybe he goes up against, whether it's Page or whoever the champion would be. Maybe he just chews somebody up like a buzzsaw. So now maybe he finds his place. Maybe he's looking for more physical altercations. The Blade and the Butcher would be perfect for this. So I just pretty much cut 8 or 10 guys off the roster that don't really fit into the world title division just yet. Maybe don't have the rankings. Maybe they're small. Maybe they have a weird outside-the-box style. But there you go. There was what I said. Adam Page, Brian Cage, maybe. That could be probably a one-off feud. Darby Allin, Dustin Rhodes, Jake Hager, Jimmy Havoc, Joey Janela, Mox after a world title run. You can even put Archer in there. Archer would fit in. Luchasaurus, Luther. I mean, there's half your roster. They're not doing anything. There's a lot of guys that are just kind of drifting because it's pretty much all or nothing with the AEW title right now. Here is something you could do with the mid-card title that makes it more than just a mid-card title. And it would also be something fresh. And because of the unique circumstances surrounding the types of matches, the physicality, the certain gimmicks, you could do a Brian Cage versus Adam Page under these hard knock style rules. And they could have a really bloody feud in some of these, anything goes matches. And then maybe Brian Cage wins the world title. And then when Adam Page moves away from the TNT title, now when they're wrestling in a traditional atmosphere, a little toned down as far as physicality goes or violence goes, now it's a completely different story. So even though you've seen those guys wrestle in different, a different division for a different title, for a different sense of importance or place on the card, the world title would be completely fresh and different scenario, even though you've seen these guys maybe wrestle 3 or 4 times. So again, there's so much opportunity other than just making it another secondary title. Again, there's taped fist matches. There's the high noon thing where you meet them at the bar and maybe you've got the camera crew paid off. Brass knuckles matches. I mentioned loaded glove, Taipei, barbed wire, collar and bull rope matches. You could have dudes do special challenges. I know it's kind of cartoony, but maybe Darby Allin wants to fight at a skate park. They just did the Undertaker Last Ride match, or whatever it's called, a Boneyard match. They just did a stadium stampede. Imagine the stuff Darby could dream up at a skate park. The compound for Matt Hardy. They do stuff like that. But, come up with these, depending on who it is, these special challenge matches. Maybe Luther, I'm not saying he's the Undertaker type guy, but he looks crazy. Maybe he's into coffins and the Undertaker type of shit. So maybe that's where you do your casket matches. Maybe you do a graveyard. You know what I mean? So I would say, especially with Hangman Page, I would take the attitude with the TNT title of anything goes, any place, anywhere, anytime, but not a 24/7 thing. Almost like what they did with the X Division or the Hardcore title without making it a hardcore title. It's not called the Hard Knocks title. It's not called the Cowboy title. But with Page at the helm as the champion, those are the type of fights you can expect to see. Where in the world title, you may see guys flipping and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Tag team championship, same thing. If you watch Adam Page in a match, you're going to see a fight. And I think that is the spirit of what I'm getting at. That's your bridge. If AEW is the new WCW, a lot of people are saying it is, then maybe Adam Page is that bridge to the old school Southern style that's really been missing. And I think Mish from Wrestling Soup even mentioned that on one of their shows a few days ago. There's really no one is appealing to that Southern style, that old school style that Adam Page seems to be able to tap into, or could tap into. So it's just kind of funny. They're doing the TV title. Now I'm hearing other people say similar stuff. And this is an idea I had probably, 4 months ago? Before all this COVID stuff happened. I was going to do an episode on this really early on, and I just decided not to. And in fact, and to finish up this discussion, this conversation, I'll give you an idea of what I think, what I would do as far as, I mentioned Page, Omega, and Cody. What I would do is Page and Omega had already had their rift, right? So maybe you take Page and Omega and you put them in the TNT title tournament. Page beats Omega, right? So now Page goes on to win the TNT title. There's now this rift between Omega and Page. Excuse me. And you can play it off like maybe Omega turns heel. Because there's been a lot of people, rightfully so, talking about how Omega, has fallen off since going to AEW. And people expected him to be a main eventer. People expected him to be a big name. That hasn't really materialized. In fact, I thought, seriously, when they announced AEW and that Omega was coming from Japan, I expected Kenny Omega to be front and center the AEW champion. Because of his style, his work rate, because of his reputation from Japan. I expected that of him. And we haven't seen that. And yes, he's gone out of his way to help get other people over. He's coaching the women's division or agenting or booking that, right? And I'll let that speak for itself. But I'm one of those people who was just waiting for Omega to break out, and he never did. They didn't use him like that. And word behind the scenes is that there was a rift between Omega and the Bucks and Cody and the direction creatively of the company, which is why you saw them re-rack everything at the first of the year. So maybe it was a power play. That's what the rumor was, as far as what I heard from people behind the scenes, indirectly. So what I was thinking was, play that up. Do Page versus Omega. But to me, the two main things to do would be to put Page in that role as the, for now, perennial TNT champion, to represent that style, that Southern throwback. See if he can main event, if he's capable, if people take to him. And then if he is, pull the trigger, no pun intended. But for now, the two main obstacles would be, one, put Page in that position and utilize Page and Omega to do that. But the main goal for Omega, moving on, is a world title feud with Cody. I would play off of, and again, this is kind of 2 for 1 because I didn't plan on going into this, but you know, I've tried to sell Page as the Hard Knocks throwback champion, and the TNT title kind of representing that as much as I could. But then I think that what you would do is use that to tell the story of Omega turning heel with his feud with Page. With then Omega moving on and targeting Cody, who is, I guess, maybe the world champion. And maybe Omega challenges whoever it is, and in similar fashion, Cody wins out, becomes a champion, and then Omega goes crazy. And I would play up, say, look, you know, Omega was on top of the world. He was ostensibly the leader of the Elite. He was the guy, you know, pushing the Bullet Club in that new direction. He was pushing wrestling into a new frontier. He was the next main eventer in Japan, and he burned a lot of bridges to go do AEW. And Cody, when he left WWE, was taken in by the Elite and ended up becoming the head of the Elite somehow, and the head of AEW, and he's executive vice president. Lily's with me again tonight, so ignore the doggy sounds. But, you know, and now look what happens. You come in, we take care of you, and now who's the star? Who's the world champion? Who's the face of AEW? Whose wife has got a shoe line? You know, but use that. And I don't really think they would go there, because much like the McMahons, Cody and his wife seem to be a little aloof and have a lack of true sense of, what is it, self-awareness? Yeah, I really doubt they would do that. But I think that's like the natural story to play on. Like, how did Cody just usurp this position? How did Cody become the face and the corporate guy and kind of take Omega's place? And I think that's the story to tell. And I really think Omega, as a heel in that position, or at least a tweener in that position, has a lot more upside than the babyface character he's shown already. And everyone, and this is another reason I was going to do this episode a couple weeks ago, when he and Paige were teasing that Paige was going to turn on him, I thought this would be a perfect catalyst for this. And this is what made me think of the tournament idea, because they were starting to come out with the TNT title, and it was going to be a tournament and all this. And I thought, okay, let's drag this out. Now they're tag team champions, haven't lose the titles, and now they both get placed into this TNT tournament. Well, they have to face each other, not even in the finals, but have Paige knock Omega out in like the semifinals or the quarterfinals. And that slow burn, like Omega's going to earn his way back. But then he decides, you know, this shit ain't working. So then maybe he and Paige have a friendly... No, because it wouldn't be friendly if Paige is the TNT champion. It'd be rough. But maybe he moves on. I've spent enough time in tag teams, and the TNT title is great, but I crave the AEW World Championship. I need to be the face of the company, blah, blah, blah. So now he's downplaying Paige's win, who's supposed to be a friend of his and a former champion, or a former tag team partner. But he's setting his sights on the same title Cody is. And then maybe there's a triple threat, or maybe they both have to... Maybe they're both in a casino match, because they like to do those. And Cody wins. And Cody ends up winning the title. And then go from there. Then you have the feud. But I really think, one, the focus should be on those elite guys. Even though you got to placate Jericho and Moxley, and I understand that. But turn Moxley heel. He could easily turn him heel. I'm not saying do it right now, but I'm saying, when his run on top is over with and they go with somebody else, then maybe have him set his sights on Paige. You're down here, you call yourself the cowboy, and you're this rough around the edges dude, and you're holding the TNT title, and you're fighting people instead of wrestling. I like that. I like it so much, I want that title. And then they do their bloody stuff. So, and again, that'd be perfect for Moxley to bring more of the blood and guts in. And this way, what I'm trying to do also is, I mentioned Randy Orton before. Randy Orton was not accepted by fans. He had, in a lot of ways, that Baron Corbin type heat where a lot of people just didn't appreciate him, even as a heel. It was like, okay, here's this third generation guy. They knew his backstory. In the ring, people saw him kind of as lazy. Then he went up against Foley in a hardcore match, and he took that bump on the thumbtacks. I remember being a fan at that time, and the turnaround and people's acceptance of him. They didn't love him. He wasn't like a babyface right away. They ended up turning him later on. But it was like, okay, you paid. It was almost like he had paid his dues. You did this physical match with Foley. No one expected him to go into the thumbtacks, and he took that bump. That one bump. I think if Roman would have done something like that, I think it would have gone a long way in getting him over with people. But when Orton did that, that was an immediate shift. So I think not only would doing this stuff make Paige look like a badass, because he's doing all this stuff, and he's wrestling that old style, and he's more physical than everyone else on the roster. But also, again, you're championing, you're bridging the gap between, the WCW or the NWO of old, NWA of old, with the Southern style, with the, again, scaffold matches are kind of dumb, because it's like, why would you put someone up 20, 30 feet in the air and have them fall into the ring? I've never seen I haven't seen a great scaffold match, because the Midnights and the Road Warriors was great. I just think they could work it now to where if it didn't look too sanitized and too safe, I think it could be a really cool gimmick. But again, I've gone about an hour. I think I've said all that I wanted to say. But I really think, they missed, and this is, I don't want this to come off as a critique necessarily, because they're running a multi-million-dollar company. It's not this simple. It's not this easy. But I feel like they're missing opportunities with some of the angles they're doing. I think they're blowing through a lot of stuff and not maximizing, not getting everything out of it. And especially this TNT title. It's just and it's not a mid-card title, because Cody is essentially the face of AEW. And now he holds the title. And it's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I just think there's so much more they could do to maximize some of this stuff and still accomplish what they want to accomplish. And they're not doing it. They're doing other stuff, which is fine. I just think when I look at this stuff, it's like, man, you could do so much with an Adam Page, more so than being tag champion right now. It's almost run its course. And I know COVID has complicated this and thrown a wrench into everything. And again, it's not as easy as maybe if everything had been status quo the past couple months. But tell me that wouldn't be great. Tell me, email me, bshowbrian@gmail.com. Go to Twitter, bshowbrian, Instagram, bshowbrian. Send me a DM. Go to Wrestling Reanimated on Facebook. Drop me a line. Tell me that wouldn't be cool. Taking a guy like the Cowboy, Hangman Page. Shit, you could even do like a Hangman match. That'd be difficult. I mean, see, I'm just thinking about this. Like, how would you do that? I don't know. First guy to hang his opponent? No, maybe it would be an offshoot of a bull rope match. So instead of being tied together at the wrist with a rope or dog collared together with a chain, maybe you have a double noose around the neck and it's a physical match that way. I don't know. But you could do so much with that. The spur match, man, that'd be kind of rough. Because obviously spurs are legal. Well, what happens if someone takes off their spurs and then goes to town? Like what's his name? Ron Bass did to Brutus Beefcake in 1989? 1988? 88. Shit. I mean, but there's so much stuff that could be tapped into. And I know a lot of new fans of AEW who may be listening to this who aren't fans of the old school. I'm not saying go back and have slow plotting matches. There's so much stuff that you could go back and you could just take a notebook paper or a legal pad and just write down like all the stuff that nobody does anymore and update it for modern times. Like I said, do a skate park thing with Darby Allin. I'm sure you could figure it out. Just a brawl at a skate park. There's fences, so there's, steel cage chain link spots. You could jump off or throw someone down a half pipe or drop them in. Darby could set up and, do his skateboard spots. There's so much stuff they could do. Luther, again, with his, maybe not the Nightmare Collective, but him being like your darker Abyss, Jim Mitchell, Undertaker, sinister satanic guy. Coffins and body bags and caskets. Oh my, all this stuff. You could do so much with this. And again, I'm not saying that every match would have to be a gimmick match. I'm not saying every blow-off would have to be a gimmick match, but I'm just saying that do the old Southern stuff. Texas Death Match. It's like a Falls Count Anywhere, but you have to answer the count of 10, right? So I quit. They haven't done a ton of gimmicks. They did the thing with Cody where, it was a steel cage match and you get 30 lashes and blah, 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 blah. Like, there's stuff like that. I get that. But, again, I think I wrote down, 10? The high noon, the bar challenge, the tape fists, brass knucks, loaded glove, Taipei death match, dude, the bunkhouse stampede. And maybe that's how you feud with Dustin. Maybe that's where the Dustin feud comes from. Bring this for the first time in wrestling and blah, 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 since the NWA, in honor of Dusty Rhodes, the return of the bunkhouse stampede. The winner will, maybe it's not a TNA title match. Maybe the winner gets the golden boot with $10,000 or $100,000 or a bonus. And maybe a future favor or something, a la Tag Wars. And maybe Dustin, maybe that's when he takes off the makeup and he's like, I'm going to live the legacy. I want to do this for Dad, and then maybe ride out my last days, right off into the sunset. But then you've got Adam Page as the TNT champion, and he's like, you know what? This looks like one of the roughest matches that you can have. What a perfect place for the TNT champion. So now he enters the Bunkhouse Stampede. Maybe he eliminates Dustin. And then do the old... Again, WWF used to do this with the Battle Royals, or even the Survivor Series matches. You have two favorites going in, Adam Page, Dustin Rhodes. Maybe Page eliminates Dustin. Dustin eliminates Page. They go and they pair off and they fight, build to their match for the TNT title, and then you have someone else win the bunkhouse match, like an MJF. And I'm not saying MJF. I'm just saying, and then you've got heat on MJF and blah blah blah. Or maybe that's the Shawn Spears thing. Maybe that's you got Shawn Spears who wins the bunkhouse match. And he says now he's the toughest son of a bitch in wrestling. And he targets Adam Page, and him and Page fight. So then maybe Page loses the title to Shawn Spears because of Dustin. And now you have Shawn Spears as the TNT champion, and he's fighting Darby Allin. And then you've got, what's his name? Dustin Rhodes fighting Adam Page in some sort of cowboy showdown, or, because of the boot, maybe the boot's legal. Cowboy boots or Spurs or whatever the fuck. Like, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to get cartoony with it. But again, that style, prevent it from being just a mid-card. It's something fresh, something that hasn't been done. It allows the throwback and the bridge to the old WCW NWA days that no one is capitalizing, and Paige is perfect for. I don't like all of my ideas. Right? Everyone thinks their ideas are the greatest, right? I don't always. I don't think just because I have an idea it's awesome, but I really like that idea. I think it maximizes a lot of different people. You can utilize people in different situations than you would in a normal matchup for a normal championship. And again, it prevents the TNT title from just looking like a secondary title. It's something completely different. And if it gets over, the South will rise again. You know what I mean? If that's the Southern style rise again. So much you can do. And again, and like I mentioned, I forgot I said this, bringing other guys back in. Well, then you've got a guy, let's say you can bring in old legends that maybe aren't associated with WWE because they're not seen in that circle as anything important. You bring in a Manny Fernandez, and he refs a match. Or maybe you have a special type of match where you need judges. So you've got Manny Fernandez, you've got Terry Funk, you've got, trying to think, Dick Murdoch. I think Dick Murdoch's dead, but bring in some of those other guys, the Southern guys. Bring in the Von Erichs. So maybe you've got I think is it Kevin who's alive, flyman from Hawaii. Then that's a conduit maybe to bring his boys in. Could you imagine a threesome? No, wrong threesome. I mean, a wrestling stable threesome with Hangman and the Von Erichs when they're ready to come up to prime time. I mean, that would be, oh man, that would be great. And no one's doing that right now. No one's doing that. The Southern Cowboy, all that shit. So, I don't know. I think I keep going on. And the longer I go, the more I think and the more stuff comes out. Maybe we'll revisit this again down the road. One thing I would like to do is, eventually if we get to if everyone starts digging this stuff and like in the regular shows, doing a secondary thing, actually showing like some booking ideas. I don't know. Don't know if people are really into that. I don't know if I want to take the time to do all that, but already gone an hour 10. What do you guys think? I said you leave me whatever you feel. Voice, fucking fried. What I challenge you, tell me that's not a good idea. Or tell me, what would you guys do? Would you do a hardcore title? Would you do an X Division type title? What would you do as far as maybe not even the TNT title, but a secondary title in AEW? What kind of secondary title would you like to see as far as a a different flavor, a different style, something along these lines. Let me know. bshowbrian@gmail.com, Wrestling Reanimated on Facebook, bshowbrian on Twitter and Instagram. If you like horror movies, you can follow Horror Reanimated. You can go to YouTube and find some horror history stories, Brian J's Horror History, or for simplistic purposes, go to bshowpodcast.com. You can find all the podcasts that I do, Wrestling and Horror Reanimated, along the same lines. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week. I don't know if I'm going to go old school or keep it current, but my name's Brian J. Thanks for taking this ride with me. Let me know what you think, and if you have any other ideas, let me know. It makes my job easier. This is Wrestling Reanimated.